Hey guys, tonight we're leaving the familiar behind. Way behind. We're slipping through a crack in time, past the buzz of notifications and the glow of screens, and into a world lit by candle wax and chandelier light. You find yourself standing on a Persian rug, so plush it swallows the sound of your footsteps. The air is thick with the scent of beeswax, rosewater, and the faint, sweet metallic hint of pinned-up hair. You're in the salon of a Parisian townhouse, circa 1740-something, and the atmosphere is a low hum of silk rustling anticipation. Everyone is dressed in brocade and powdered wigs, so towering you worry they might brush against the painted cherubs on the ceiling. And they're all gathered around a table. Not for cards, not for dinner, for something far more serious. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere in the world, maybe curled up in bed or on a late-night commute, drop a comment below and let me know where you are and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see where this quiet community gathers. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're trying to blend in, but your 21st century posture is a dead giveaway. A footman in livery offers you a delicate porcelain cup of something that smells like chocolate, but has the kick of a mule. You sip it, and your eyes water. Someone nearby chuckles. It's the New World cocoa, they whisper, infused with a little Venezuelan fortitude. You nod, pretending this is completely normal. It is not. You glance around. There are no phones to stare at, no clocks ticking loudly. Time here feels like honey, slow and golden and slightly sticky. The only urgency comes from the clustered group by the large, circular table in the center of the room. That's where you're headed. As you move closer, you hear the clink of coins, the rustle of banknotes, and phrases uttered with grave seriousness. His spiral is particularly tight this season, and I've heard his mucus has exceptional tensile strength. Your brain, still wired for modern efficiency, short-circuits for a second. Mucus? Tensile strength? You elbow your way politely to the front, and there it is. The arena. It's not a dirt track or a velodrome. It's a masterpiece of miniature landscaping constructed right on the tabletop. A circular path, about 3 feet in diameter, is marked out in what looks like finely crushed green marble, likely malachite. Tiny hedges made of moss border the track. There's a miniature castle, a grotto with a mirror for a pond, even a Lilliputian windmill that doesn't actually turn. This isn't a race course. It's a diorama, a fantasy land for, well, you're about to find out. A man in an embroidered waistcoat, clearly the host, claps his hands. The chatter dies. Mesdames et messieurs, he announces, his voice a smooth baritone. The contenders are prepared. He gestures to a footman holding what looks like a jewelry box lined with velvet. Inside, on individual little satin pillows, are the athletes. Your eyes aren't deceiving you. They are snails. Not the garden variety, lettuce-munching kind you'd find after a rainstorm. These are glamorous. Their shells gleam in the candlelight, stripes of amber, chestnut, and creamy white. They are polished. Someone has literally polished snails. One has a tiny, almost invisible dot of gold paint on its shell, like a racing stripe. They are utterly, profoundly still. This is the big, well-known historical fact we're starting with. In the bored, decadent heart of 18th century France, the aristocracy turned snail racing into a high-stakes, meticulously organized social event. It was the ultimate flex of having so much leisure time that you could watch mollusks crawl and call it a sport. You, with your packed calendar and looming deadlines, would not survive a weekend here. The sheer, unadulterated slowness of the entertainment would break your spirit by lunchtime. But here it's not boring. It's tense, because money, pride, and social standing are all resting on the leisurely pace of a gastropod. The host picks up one of the snails, handling it with the reverence of a jeweler setting a diamond. This, he intones, is Le Glorieux, winner of the autumn meet at Versailles. His lineage traces back to the gardens of the Trianon. A murmur of appreciation runs through the crowd. You look at Le Glorieux. He is a snail. He has retreated fully into his shell. He is currently a piece of decorative limestone, as far as you can tell. This is going to be a long night. But as you watch the faces around you, lit by flickering flames, you see it. Pure, unironic fascination. This is their Super Bowl, their Champions League final. And you're about to experience every agonizingly slow, utterly bizarre minute of it. The air grows still. The bets are placed. The Great Snail Race of the century is about to begin. The host places Le Glorieux back on his satin cushion with a finality that suggests he's just unveiled a masterpiece. Your gaze travels down the line of the velvet box. Next to the champion is a snail with a shell of a singular, deep burgundy color, like a fine wine. This, the host continues, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial tone that makes the crowd lean in, is Madame de Pompadour's secret favorite, Bourgogne. She fed him crushed rose petals and oatmeal for a fortnight. A respectful, knowing sigh ripples through the ladies present. You catch the eye of a young man next to you, his face powdered to a matte porcelain finish. He rolls his eyes almost imperceptibly. Rose petals, he mutters under his breath, just for you. Nonsense. It's the lettuce that matters. The green, bitter kind from the kitchen garden. That's what gives them staying power. You nod as if this is a profound insider tip. The footman moves along. The next contender is smaller, its shell a chaotic mosaic of browns and grays. L'escargot du peuple, the host announces, and a few people titter. A wild card, literally, plucked from the vineyards of Bordeaux. He knows nothing of palace life. He runs on instinct. There's a romantic appeal to the underdog, even here. A few coins are pushed toward this scrappy outsider. Then comes a snail with a perfectly spherical, pale yellow shell. Citron, property of the Duke of Orleans. Note the aerodynamic form. People actually lean in to scrutinize the shell's curve. You have to bite the inside of your cheek. Aerodynamics. On a snail. The final contestant is the largest, its shell dark and heavily ridged. Le rocher. The rock. Implacable. Unmoved by distraction. A philosopher among snails. You half expect it to give a lecture on stoicism instead of moving. This is where we get our first obscure, delightful fact. While the snails were the stars, they didn't race alone. Each had a dedicated handler, often a page boy or a junior footman, known as a chasseur d'escargot, a snail hunter. But his job wasn't to hunt them. It was to be their trainer, valet, and tactical coach. These boys would spend hours observing their charge's habits. Did it prefer the cool, damp side of its terrarium? Did it move more after a light misting of water? Would it be spurred on by the gentle vibration of a lute string plucked nearby? The preparation was absurdly detailed. Some trainers were known to place their snails on chilled marble slabs to invigorate them before a race, while others believed in a pre-race diet of crushed violet leaves for nervous agility. Historians have found diary entries from these boys complaining about their charges being stubborn or having no competitive spirit. Imagine being a 14-year-old in 1750, your career prospects hinging on the motivational state of a mollusk. As the presentation ends, the handlers step forward. They are serious-faced boys in slightly too large uniforms. Each takes his designated snail and carries it not to the starting line, but to a separate, smaller preparation table. Here, the final rituals begin. You watch one boy use a tiny, soft-bristled brush, probably meant for detailed portraiture, to dust any stray specks from Bourgogne's majestic shell. Another places Le Rocher on a piece of damp black velvet, perhaps to get him in a moist, mobile mood. The handler for L'escargot du peuple simply looks at his charge with a kind of weary solidarity. No frills for the common snail. You feel a tap on your shoulder. It's the eye-rolling young man from before. It's all theater, you know, he whispers, his breath smelling of mint and wine. The rose petals, the aerodynamics, superstitious nonsense. The only thing that truly matters is the salt. He pauses, letting the word hang. You look at him blankly. Not on them, you barbarian. He scoffs, though good-naturedly. Near them, on the track, a hint of it in the air. It stimulates urgency, a memory of danger. But too much, and they retreat into their shells for the duration. It's a delicate art. He winks and melts back into the crowd, leaving you with a new layer of absurdity to ponder. Strategic salinity. Of course, the crowd's murmur rises again, a cocktail of gossip and gambling advice. I hear Le Glorieux's handler sings to him. Italian arias. Citron is faster on a counterclockwise track. Have you accounted for the curvature? You, a stranger from the future, are beginning to see the intricate social ecosystem at play. This isn't just about snails. It's about patronage. The Duke of Orleans snail, losing to a vineyard wild snail, would be a slight social embarrassment. Betting on the right snail is a display of loyalty, of insider knowledge. The snails are merely the furry, slow-moving proxies for the humans around the table. Their tiny, wet journey is laden with the immense, invisible weight of status, money, and reputation. The handlers finish their work. With solemn ceremony, the snails are now carried toward the magnificent, moss-hedged circuit on the main table. The moment is approaching. The great, slow, glistening procession is about to begin its epic trek. The snails are not placed directly on the starting line. That would be uncouth, lacking in drama. Instead, each handler carries his charge to one of 5 small, ornate pedestals arranged around the outer edge of the table, like tiny mounting blocks for knights before a joust. From here, the athletes and the audience can survey the battlefield. And now, with the competitors elevated, you finally get the full, breathtaking view of the course. You lean in, and the detail is staggering. It's not just a circle. It's a narrative. The track, that path of crushed green malachite, wins its way through a miniature kingdom. It starts in a forest of meticulously clipped thyme and rosemary bushes, no taller than your thumb. It then curves around the mirror pond, where the snails might catch a disorienting glimpse of their own reflected glory. Next, it skirts the base of the tiny castle, complete with toothpick-sized turrets and a drawbridge made of a sliver of balsa wood. There's a straightaway along a cliff edge, a cleverly painted strip of blue and white porcelain suggesting a dramatic drop. Then, the most notorious section, the grotto. This is a tunnel formed from a piece of curved, gray-blonde bark, its interior lined with damp moss. It's dark, cool, and mysterious. Emerging from the grotto, the track passes the non-functional windmill and finishes back at the starting line in the thyme forest. The total distance is perhaps 4 feet, a journey that, for a human, would take 2 steps. For our contenders, it is an odyssey. You admire the course, a soft voice says beside you. It's an older woman, her face a delicate map of wrinkles framed by a lace cap. Her eyes are bright with intelligence. My husband designed it. He studied the principles of the English landscape garden. You see, capability brown in miniature. The curves are not arbitrary. They are meant to provoke a sense of exploration, of gentle adventure. A snail, we believe, is more likely to move with purpose if its journey is aesthetically pleasing. You simply nod, accepting that in this universe, snail psychology and 18th-century landscape aesthetics are deeply intertwined. She points a bony finger toward the grotto. The chicanery usually happens there, in the dark. It's where alliances are broken. She says this with the gravity of a general discussing a mountain pass. This leads us to our popular historical nugget, the sheer extravagance of these snail racing arenas. While the salon's table is a masterpiece, it was far from unique. Wealthy patrons commissioned elaborate, permanent racing tables from the same ebonists who made their writing desks and card tables. Some had intricate inlaid wood tracks. Others featured functioning water features, tiny recirculating streams crossed by miniature bridges. The most famous, owned by a certain Comte de Buffon, yes, the naturalist, was said to have a track that wound through a miniature zoo of stuffed exotic animals. It was a display of wealth and whimsy, a signal that one had the resources and the imagination to turn a childish fancy into a high-art installation. But here's the strange, lesser-known fact. The maintenance of these courses was a science unto itself. The moss had to be kept alive and at a precise level of dampness. Too wet, and the snails would simply stop to feast on it. Too dry, and it would offer no tempting humidity. The crushed stone track had to be raked between races to ensure a perfectly smooth, consistent surface. There are records of servants being disciplined for leaving microscopic pebbles on the track that could disturb the glide of a favored snail. The mirror pond had to be polished relentlessly to prevent smudges that might confuse a contestant. The entire ecosystem was managed with a precision that would put a modern golf course groundskeeper to shame, all in service of a creature whose top speed you could outpace with a yawn. The host claps his hands again twice. To your stations. The handlers descend from their pedestals and move to the starting line, a thin ribbon of silver thread laid across the green track in the time forest. With the utmost care, each handler places a snail just behind the silver thread, orienting them so their eye stalks are vaguely pointed down the track. The snails, for their part, remain philosophical. Le Glorieux is a closed fortress. Bourgogne has extended a tentative, velvety foot, but seems in no hurry. Citron is perfectly still. Le Rocher looks like he's meditating. Only l'escargot du Peuple shows any sign of life, his head slowly waving from side to side as if scouting the competition. The crowd falls into a hush, so complete you can hear the sputtering of a candle wick across the room. All eyes are fixed on those 5 specks on the table. The only movement is the gentle rise and fall of lace-covered chests. The host raises a white handkerchief. The Great Snail Race is moments from commencement. You find yourself holding your breath, caught in the silent, collective anticipation. The distance between boredom and profound suspense, you realize, is just a few inches of crafted fantasy and a lot of money on the line. The handkerchief flutters down. It doesn't fall. It seems to drift in the thick, perfumed air, a silent, slow-motion parachute of silk. It lands on the table's edge with a whisper. No ganschet, no trampid blast. That's the signal. The handlers, in unison, take a single step back from the table. Their job is done. The race is now in the feet of the participants. For a long moment, nothing happens. The silence stretches, becoming elastic, then taut, then almost uncomfortable. Someone in the back stifles a cough, and it sounds like a cannon blast. You stare at the silver starting line. Le Glorieux remains a sealed monument. Bourgogne's exploratory foot has retracted slightly. Citron is a pale, motionless pearl. Le Rocher is a stone. L'escargot du Peuple, however, has begun to move. Not with a burst of speed, but with a deliberate, almost contemplative extension of his head and foot. He touches the silver thread with his mucus, considers it, and slowly, so slowly you think you might be imagining it, begins to ooze his way over it. A collective intake of breath. The underdog is on the move. This triggers a frenzy of activity, but not from the snails, from a crowd. The hushed reverence shatters into a low, urgent buzz of conversation. A man in a lilac coat rushes to the host's side, a small ledger in hand. Odds are shifting, he hisses, trying to keep his voice down. The people's snail is at 20-1. I'm taking more action on Le Rocher, a steady favorite at 3-1. This man is the bookie, and his ledger is a maze of names, numbers, and cryptic symbols. Bets aren't just for win-play show. Oh no, the 18th-century French aristocracy bet on everything. You can wager on which snail will reach the mirror pond first, which will spend the most time in the grotto, whether any snail will turn completely around and head backwards. There's even a side bet. You overhear on whether citron shell will touch the windmill during the race. The specificity is mind-boggling. This is our well-known historical beat, the rampant, elaborate gambling that surrounded these events. It was the engine of the whole spectacle. A single race could see the equivalent of thousands of modern euros change hands. Watches, rings, even promissory notes for parcels of land were wagered on the glacial progress of a gastropod. It was less about the snails and more about the thrill of risk, the social display of wealth, and the cunning reading of odds that were, by any rational measure, completely unreadable. Now for the strange, delightful secret. The most serious bettors didn't just look at the snails. They employed mucus analysts. That's right. Certain individuals, often older servants with keen eyesight, would crouch by the track before the race and examine the quality of the slime trail left by a snail during its warm-up. They judged its viscosity, its reflectivity, its trail integrity. A thin, watery trail was a sign of poor health or nerves. A thick, opalescent, resilient trail signaled a champion in peak condition. It meant the snail could adhere to and push off from surfaces more effectively. These connoisseurs of snail slime would whisper their findings to their patrons, who would then place last-minute, enormous bets based on goo. Historians still debate how much science was actually involved versus theatrical quackery, but manuscripts from the period contained detailed descriptions of mucus quality that read like wine-tasting notes. Un bouquet visqueux avec de notes de resistance et un longueur en bouche exceptionnelle. A viscous bouquet, with notes of resilience and an exceptional length on the palate? You get the idea. You feel a tug on your sleeve. It's the eye-rolling young man again. He gestures discreetly toward a finely dressed older gentleman who is staring intently at l'escargot du Peuple, his hands clenched behind his back. See the marquis? He's not betting on speed. He's betting on stubbornness. He's put 50 livres on that snail to be the first to enter the grotto and the last to leave it. A bet on sheer, antisocial contrarianism. He shakes his head in admiration. It's a brilliant wager. It's a bet on character, not velocity. Meanwhile, on the track, a second snail has stirred. It's not the favorite, Le Glorieux. It's Citron, the Duke of Orleans' aerodynamic entry. With a graceful, unhurried unfurling, its pale body emerges, and it begins a slow, deliberate arc toward the inside of the track, its path a model of geometric precision. It hasn't crossed the start line yet, but it's positioning itself. This is taken as a sign of tremendous strategic intelligence. A murmur of approval runs through the Duke's contingent. He's taking the racing line. Already, someone exclaims, the race is no longer a static picture. It is a story unfolding in millimeters per minute. L'escargot du Peuple is a full centimeter past the line, a veritable giant leap for snail kind. Citron is angling for advantage. The other three are statues. The ledger keeper's quill is scratching furiously. The scent of anticipation has shifted from perfume and beeswax to something sharper. The smell of sweat under powder, of money on the move. You're no longer a detached observer. You find yourself craning your neck, your own heartbeat syncing with the slow, silent pulse of the room, waiting for the next tiny, world-shaking movement. The movement, when it comes, is not from a snail. It's from a footman who steps forward with a long, slender rod, tipped not with a sharp point, but with a single, soft feather from what looks like a pheasant. He extends it over the table with the reverence of a conductor raising a baton. You watch, bewildered, as he gently brushes the feather against the back of Bourgogne's shell. It's the lightest of touches, a caress. For a moment, nothing. Then a miracle occurs. Bourgogne's head emerges, not fully, but his eye stalks extend, waving gently as if testing the air. He begins to move, not toward the track, but in a slow, confused circle. The footman retracts the rod. The crowd exhales. The tickler, your powdered friend, whispers, materializing once more at your elbow. Standard procedure. If a contestant is contemplative at the start, a gentle stimulus is permitted, but only with an approved instrument. A feather from the host's own aviary. No fingers, no hot breath. It's in the rules. He says rules with a straight face. You realize there's an entire codified rulebook for this endeavor, a scripture of slowness. The tickler now moves to Rocher. The feather dances over his stony shell. No response. He's a mountain. The tickler tries again, a slightly firmer stroke. Nothing. A murmur of concern. A snail refusing the tickle is a bad sign. It suggests a profound, unshakable apathy. This brings us to the widely accepted historical event, the start of the race itself, often a non-event requiring human intervention. Contemporaneous accounts describe races where the off was called, but the snails remained immobile for upwards of an hour, requiring prodding, misting, and even the strategic placement of more attractive lettuce further down the track to coax them into motion. Patience wasn't just a virtue here. It was the entire sport. But here is a bizarre, lesser-known fact from the underbelly of the sport, the scandal of the heated tickler. In a famous 1763 race in Lyon, a favorite snail named L'Invincible remained stubbornly inert despite repeated feathering. In frustration, its owner, a chevalier known for his hot temper, secretly ordered his servant to heat the metal rod holding the feather over a candle flame. The idea was to provide a warm, comforting stimulus. The servant, overzealous, made it too hot. When the heated feather touched L'Invincible's shell, the snail didn't just move. It exploded from its shell with a speed never before witnessed, traversing nearly 6 inches in a minute before retreating permanently into a catatonic state, its foot reportedly slightly scorched. The cheat was discovered, the chevalier was disgraced, and a new rule was emphatically added to the racing code. All tickling instruments shall be at ambient room temperature, to be verified by a steward of the race prior to commencement. Historians still debate whether this incident represents the first known case of mechanical doping in animal sports. Back on our table, the tickler has given up on Rocher. He moves to the favorite, Le Glorieux. The feather descends. It makes one pass, then another. On the third, languid stroke, something shifts. It's not a movement you see with your eyes, so much as a feeling in the room. The shell, which had been a perfect, impenetrable coil, seems to soften at its aperture. Then, with a regal slowness that draws gasps, the great champion emerges. His body is a deep, creamy beige, his head large and deliberate. He doesn't bother with exploratory waves of his stalks. He orients himself directly down the track, as if he has memorized the course, and begins to glide. His motion is different from the others. Where l'escargot du Peuple moves with a kind of rustic determination and citron with geometric precision, Le Glorieux moves with authority. His mucus trail is wide and iridescent in the candlelight, a highway of his own making. He crosses the silver starting line without hesitation. The crowd erupts in polite but fervent applause. The champion is on a course. The race's geography is now taking shape. L'escargot du Peuple is still in the lead, nearing the edge of the time forest. Citron has finally crossed the line and is hugging the inner curve beautifully. Bourgogne has stopped his confused circling and is now aiming erratically towards the mirror pond. Le Glorieux is a powerful, steady force moving up from the rear. And Rocher, Le Rocher is the bets are being furiously updated. The ledger keeper's forehead is glistening. You notice people aren't just watching the snails. They're watching each other, reading faces for tells, for hidden knowledge. A lady fans herself rapidly, her eyes fixed on Bourgogne. Is she overheating from the candles? Or is her fortune tied to the rose-petal-fed snail's erratic path? The game is as much human as it is molluscan. And the track, that beautiful, absurd miniature world, awaits its first conqueror. The lead snail, l'escargot du peuple, approaches the first true landmark, the mirror pond. His journey so far has been a straight line of pure, unrefined purpose. But as his head stalks extend over the rim of the crushed malachite and touch the smooth, polished silver of the pond's edge, he stops. Utterly, his body is half on the track, half off, his eye stalks wavering over his own reflection. He seems hypnotized. The crowd groans. The vanity, someone whispers, a little too loudly. He's admiring himself. It's a classic rookie mistake. The mirror pond was designed as a psychological trap, a siren song of self-regard for the easily distracted competitor. The vineyard snail, who has likely never seen his own image, is now locked in an existential staring contest with himself. His momentum, that precious, hard-won momentum, is gone. This allows Citron, the pale yellow strategist, to close the gap. But Citron doesn't fall for the pond. He executes a perfect, wide arc around it, staying firmly on the crushed green track. It's a masterclass in focus. The Duke of Orleans faction lets out a collective, smug sigh. Meanwhile, Bourgogne has become a problem. Instead of following the track, he is beelined, snail-lined, directly for the mossy bank of the pond, attracted by its superior dampness. He has left the course entirely and is now contentedly munching on a piece of the decorative moss, his shell vibrating faintly with the joy of discovery. He is disqualified in everything but official decree. His handler looks mortified. The lady who bet on him stops fanning and lets her fan hang limp at her side, her face as pale as her powder. This moment provides our well-known historical event, the sheer unpredictability and frequent anticlimax of the races. Contemporary journals are filled with accounts of favorite snails stopping to eat the scenery, mating with a rival in the middle of the track, or simply falling asleep. One famous race in the court of Louis XV was declared a draw after all three contestants climbed on top of each other in the center of the arena and formed a stationary, pyramidal huddle for the rest of the afternoon. The sport was a constant battle between human order and gastropod chaos. Now for the strange, tactical secret. While the snails moved, or didn't, the handlers weren't entirely passive. They couldn't touch their charges, but they could employ environmental encouragement. You see one handler, the boy for the stalled l'escargot du peuple, slowly reach out with a small, dry paintbrush. He doesn't touch the snail. Instead, he very gently brushes the track ahead of it, creating a tiny, almost imperceptible cloud of malachite dust that drifts across the snail's stalks. It's a suggestion, a hint that the path forward is there, not in the mirror. The snail, irritated or intrigued, twitches and slowly turns its head away from its reflection. The handler holds his breath. It's a delicate art, too much dust, and you could clog its breathing pore, a foul punishable by immediate disqualification. Historians poring over old rulebooks find these minute regulations fascinating. They reveal a world where the line between gentle guidance and cheating was as thin as a snail's trail. Le Glorieux, unimpeded by such vulgar distractions, is now a force of nature. He has passed the contemplative Bourgogne and the stalled people's snail without so much as a twitch of his stalks. He is on a collision course with Citron, who is just exiting the curve around the pond. They are not side by side. Citron is a few inches ahead, but Le Glorieux is on the outside, moving with a wider, more powerful glide. They are about to approach the miniature castle. And here, the first true tragedy strikes. Citron, hugging the inside wall of the castle's base, attempts to squeeze through a narrow gap between a turret's foundation and a tiny, painted rock. It's a tight maneuver, one that his aerodynamic shell should, in theory, allow. But in his precision, he misjudges. His pale shell grinds, with a faint, horrifying scritch against the rough-hewn balsa wood of the castle wall. It's not a crash. It's a hesitation. But for a snail, it's a catastrophe. The contact shocks his system. He stops dead, recoiling slightly into his shell. His perfect geometric momentum is shattered. Le Glorieux, on the clearer outside path, flows past him without pause. A groan of sympathy and the clink of coins being reluctantly paid out rises from the Duke's corner. 18th-Century's race, for all intents and purposes, is over. He will spend the next 10 minutes in a defensive, stunned retreat. The field has been cleared. The distraction, the dropout, the tactical error, all have fallen away. It is now a two-snail race. The stalled but potentially resurgent l'escargot du Peuple, finally turning from the mirror, and the majestic, unstoppable Le Glorieux, now taking the lead as he approaches the cliff edge straightaway. The grotto, that dark cave of alliances and betrayals, looms ahead for both of them. The air in the room is electric with a new kind of tension. It's no longer about if something will happen, but what form the inevitable slow-motion drama will take. Le Glorieux glides onto the straightaway along the painted porcelain cliff, his iridescent trail a shimmering border between the green track and the illusion of a sheer drop. His pace is metronomic, unhurried, majestic. Behind him, l'escargot du Peuple has finally broken free from the mirror's spell and is moving again, but with a different energy. It's not the purposeful drive of before. It's a slower, more sinuous exploration, as if he's learned to be wary of this strange, miniature world. The distance between them is perhaps 3 snail lengths, a gulf that feels both immense and surmountable in the slow calculus of the race. The crowd chatter has died down to a low, analytical hum. The frantic betting has given way to observation. This is the contemplative heart of the race, the longueur, where the true nature of the sport reveals itself. It's not about speed. It's about endurance, temperament, and the philosophical will to simply keep going. A man with spectacles perched on his nose leans toward his companion and says, quite seriously, "You see, Le Glorieux moves with the elan vital, a pure expression of being. The other, he moves with question marks." His companion nods sagely. In this candlelit room, surrounded by absurdity, they're discussing the very essence of motion. This is the popular historical lens, the 18th century French Enlightenment's obsession with observing and classifying nature, even in its most ridiculous forms. Philosophers like Diderot and Buffon wrote lengthy treatises on natural history, seeking to understand the laws of the universe. The snail race was, in its own tiny, satirical way, a manifestation of this. It was nature, stripped of grandeur and danger, placed under a magnifying glass for the amusement and contemplation of the elite. They weren't just watching snails. They were playing God to a Lilliputian kingdom, observing behaviors, noting reactions to stimuli, and drawing wildly anthropomorphic conclusions. But here is a wonderfully obscure fact that bridges that gap between parody and genuine science. The great naturalist Georges-Louis Leclerc, Comte de Buffon, he of the extravagant racing table, actually used his snail races to inform his scientific work. He would note how different surfaces affected speed, how light and shadow influenced direction, and even how the snails seemed to communicate or avoid each other through chemical cues in their mucus. In one of his less formal journals, he penned a note, "Observe today that lastery, when placed on a surface warmed by the sun through a lens, increased its pace by an estimated 15%. Does the mollusk seek warmth, or is it fleeing the focused light?" The question of motive in a brain the size of a poppy seed is profound. So, while the aristocracy tittered and bet, a genuine, if eccentric, scientific inquiry was sometimes taking place on those ornate tables. Historians still debate how much of Buffon's serious work was subtly influenced by his weekends spent watching funded gastropods. Back in the salon, the race is entering its most psychologically fraught phase. Le Glorieux is approaching the entrance to the grotto. The dark, damp archway of bark looms before him. He does not slow. He does not speed up. He simply flows toward the darkness with the inevitability of tide. Behind him, l'escargot du Peuple has found a new source of motivation. He appears to be following Luc Glorieux's glittering mucus trail, using it as a highway. It's a clever, pragmatic move. He's literally riding the champion's coattails, or slime trail, conserving his own energy by adhering to a pre-lubricated path. A murmur of both disapproval and admiration runs through the crowd. Is it cheating? The rulebook is silent on the use of a rival's mucus. It's a gray area, a tactical innovation from the streets. Luc Glorieux's front half disappears into the shadow of the grotto. This is the moment. The grotto is the great equalizer. Inside is cool, damp, and dark, the ideal snail habitat. The danger is not of stopping, but of becoming too comfortable, of deciding that the race is over and this cozy cave is a perfect place to settle down for a nap. The crowd leans forward as one. All eyes are fixed on the dark archway, waiting for the champion to emerge on the other side. The only sound is the faint, wet whisper of l'escargot du Peuple sliding along the champion's trail, inching ever closer to the grotto entrance himself. The middle of the race is a silent, dark tunnel, and anything can happen in the damp, unseen middle. Luc Glorieux vanishes into the grotto. For a full minute, there is no sign of him. The crowd stares at the dark archway, as if expecting a dragon to emerge. The suspense is no longer about speed, it's about reappearance. Will he come out? When? And in what state of mind? This is the point in the race where human patience, already stretched thin, begins to fray and morph into something else. Active intervention. The handler for Luc Glorieux, a boy trying very hard to look impassive, takes a small, perforated tin canister from his pocket. He steps carefully to the side of the table opposite the grotto's exit. He gives the canister a gentle shake. A fine, almost invisible mist of water drifts from its holes, settling on the track just beyond the grotto's mouth. It's a signal, a promise of refreshment just ahead. He's trying to lure his champion out of the darkness with the snail equivalent of a water station. It's allowed, barely, but he's not the only one acting. The owner of l'escargot du Peuple, a ruddy-faced man with the bearing of a provincial wine grower, is not about to let his scrappy contender lose his advantage. He nods sharply to his own handler. This boy produces not water, but a leaf. A single, fresh, dark green lettuce leaf, which he places with theatrical casualness on the track about 2 inches past the grotto exit, directly in what would be Luc Glorieux's path if he emerges. It's a blatant obstruction, a snack trap. A gasp runs through the salon. The host's head whips around. Monsieur, the leaf. It is not part of the course. The wine grower spreads his hands, all innocence. It fell from the decoration, surely. A piece of the hedge. My boy is merely removing it. The handler quickly picks the leaf back up, but the damage, or the temptation, has been strategically placed. The line between enthusiastic support and subtle sabotage is being crossed, and everyone knows it. This is our well-known historical beat, the infamous outside influences that plague the sport. As bets grew heavier, the purity of the race eroded. Stories abound of owners using everything from drops of attractive snail pheromones to tiny, hidden magnets, useless, but they sounded scientific, to guide their entrance or hinder others. Now for the strange, specific scandal. The most egregious case didn't involve food or water. It involved sound. In 1772, a baroness was caught employing a musician to sit under the racing table and play a very specific, low note on a cello whenever a rival snail seemed to be gaining momentum. The vibration, transmitted through the table legs, was meant to unsettle the opponent, making it retract. She argued it was merely atmospheric music for the event. The racing committee, after lengthy debate, banned targeted acoustical encouragement, unless it was general background music approved by all owners. The minutes from that committee meeting, which seriously debate the vibrational sensitivity of gastropods, are a masterpiece of absurd bureaucracy. In a quiet salon, the tension shifts from the grotto to the people around the table. Alliances are forming and breaking with silent glances. The Duke of Orleans, his snail citron out of the race, now quietly places a new bet on l'escargot du peuple, purely despite the favorite's owner, with whom he has a land dispute. The lady who lost on Bourgogne now vehemently cheers for the vineyard snail, hoping to recoup her losses. The race is no longer on the table. It's in the shifting loyalties of the powdered and perfumed spectators. And then a ripple of movement. At the grotto's entrance, where l'escargot du peuple has been patiently waiting, something changes. Perhaps spurred by the hint of water in the air, or simply bored of waiting, he doesn't follow Luc Glorieux's trail into the darkness. Instead, he does something revolutionary. He begins to climb. His foot adheres to the rough, vertical bark of the grotto's exterior. He starts to scale the curved roof, moving over the top of the tunnel itself. The crowd erupts in shocked disbelief. He's going off-road. He's taking a shortcut. The host sputters. The course is the track. He must follow the track. But the wine grower booms with laughter. The rules say the snail must complete the circuit. They do not specify it must keep its foot upon your precious crushed stone. He is navigating the terrain. It's brilliant. A fierce argument breaks out. Is this innovation or cheating? As the authorities debate, the small, tenacious snail continues his ascent, moving in a slow, determined arc over the top of the grotto, aiming to descend on the other side and potentially beat the champion who is, for all anyone knows, still loitering in the pleasant darkness within. The race has just been turned upside down. Literally, chaos, polite but firm, descends upon the salon. The host is waving his hands, appealing to the room for order. The wine grower is thumping the table, gently, so as not to disturb the athletes, in defense of his snail's alpine maneuver. The rule book is produced, a surprisingly thick, leather-bound volume, and 3 men in wigs pore over it, their fingers tracing lines of fine script by candlelight. Article 14, 1 in tones. Le parcours est défini par la bordure de mousse. Le concurrent doit maintenir un contact raisonnable avec la piste désignée. The course is defined by the moss border. The competitor must maintain reasonable contact with the designated track. Reasonable contact, the wine grower exclaims triumphantly. His mucus touches the bark. The bark is part of the course architecture. It is reasonable. It's a dazzling piece of pedantry. While the lawyers of leisure debate, the race, oblivious to the human turmoil, continues in its 2 parallel realities. Inside the grotto, all is mystery. Has Le Glorieux stopped for a nap? Is he grazing on the damp moss lining the tunnel? Or is he moving with silent, unseen purpose? On the roof, l'escargot du peuple is now a dark silhouette against the lighter bark, a mountaineer in extreme slow motion. He has reached the apex of the grotto's curve and is beginning his perilous descent down the other side. His shell tilts at a daring angle. The crowd's anger and amusement have melted into pure, absorbed fascination. They have never seen anything like this. This is not racing. This is rebellion. This moment captures the popular historical truth about the sport's appeal. It was a canvas for human drama. The snails were mere catalysts. The real story was the eruption of passion, argument, and social maneuvering around them. A single, unconventional snail could expose the fragile tensions and hidden rivalries in a room, turning a silly pastime into a microcosm of the aristocratic world itself, governed by opaque rules, subject to bold interpretation, and easily upended by an unexpected actor. But here is a wonderfully odd footnote. The debate over l'escargot du peuple shortcut was not unique. There exists a record from 1758 of a snail named Le Voltigeur, the acrobat, who, frustrated by a sticky patch on the track, simply attached its mucus to the overhanging branch of a miniature tree and swung, in a slow, pendulous arc, over a full 6 inches of course, bypassing a difficult corner entirely. The ruling then? Disqualification on the grounds of aerial propulsion, not in the spirit of terrestrial racing. The owner protested, claiming it was a simple extension of the snail's natural adhesive capabilities. The case was said to have inspired a brief, faddish interest in designing obstacle courses with intended vertical elements, though it never quite caught on. Historians still chuckle over the mental image of 18th-century aristocrats designing miniature rock climbing walls for mollusks. Back in our story, the legal huddle reaches a verdict. The host, looking pained, announces, as the bark of the grotto is an intrinsic part of the course's scenic construction, and as the snail has not left the bounds of the designated arena, his progress shall be allowed. However, he must touch the track on the other side before proceeding to the windmill. A transfer of contact, shall we say. It's a Solomonic compromise that satisfies no one completely, which is the mark of a good compromise. Just as the ruling is delivered, 2 things happen simultaneously. First, l'escargot du Pouple's questing foot touches the crushed malachite track on the far side of the grotto. He has successfully completed his shortcut. A cheer rises from his supporters. Second, from the dark mouth of the grotto, Le Glorieux finally emerges. He is not rushing. He is not flustered. He is exactly as he was when he entered. Regal, steady, his mucus trail a constant, wide ribbon. He did not stop in the grotto. He did not hurry. He simply passed through, a king crossing his own darkened hall. The 2 snails are now, astonishingly, side by side. The shortcut has erased the champion's lead. They are at the foot of the non-functional windmill, the final landmark before the home straight back into the time forest. The vineyard snail and the palace champion. The innovator and the institution. They are neck and neck in a race that has become a perfect slow-motion parable. The entire fortune of the evening, and a significant measure of social pride, now rests on the final, damp foot-lengths of the course. The air is so still you can hear the soft, syncopated of 2 separate trails of mucus being laid down upon the stone. The silence is absolute, profound, a tangible thing hanging in the perfumed air. Every eye in the room is locked on the 2 specks of life by the miniature windmill. They are not touching. They are not interacting. They are simply being side by side, each pursuing its own destiny along parallel inches of green stone. Le Glorieux is a fraction closer to the inside of the final curve. L'escargot du Pouple is on the outside, his shell still flecked with tiny fragments of bark from his climb. They move not with urgency, but with a tectonic, inexorable certainty. The distance to the finish line in the time forest is less than a foot. In human terms, it's nothing. In snail terms, it's a marathon's final mile. This is the climax, the moment the entire evening has been designed for. And yet, there is no roar. There is only the shared, held breath of 50 people, the rustle of a silk skirt as someone shifts their weight, the almost imperceptible drip of wax from a candle onto a silver holder. You find your own muscles tensed, your jaw clenched. You are, against all reason and modern sensibility, completely invested. You need to know which tiny, wet creature will touch the silver finishing thread first. This final stretch embodies the well-known historical conclusion of these races, an often anticlimactic, infinitesimally close finish that could take an hour to resolve. Diaries from the period describe spectators leaving for supper and returning to find the snails still locked in their glacial duel, having moved perhaps an inch in their absence. The tension wasn't in a sprint. It was in a war of attrition, a test of which snails' internal metronome would keep ticking just a fraction of a second longer without pause. Now for the strange and intimate detail. In these final moments, the handlers were forbidden from any intervention, even tickling. They could only watch, but their bodies betrayed them. Accounts describe boys swaying almost imperceptibly, as if by sheer will they could levitate their charge forward. Some would whisper under their breath, not words, but a continuous, low hum of encouragement. It was believed, superstitiously, that a handler's focused energy could be transferred through the air to his snail. Scientists of the day would have scoffed, but in the thick atmosphere of the salon, it felt real. The line between trainer and racer blurred. The boy's pride, his future tip or punishment, was quite literally moving at a snail's pace toward destiny. On the table, the parable continues. Le Glorieux, on the inside track, begins a very slight, elegant drift inward, tightening his line for the final curve. It is the move of a seasoned professional, minimizing distance. L'escargot du Peuple, perhaps tired from his climb, or perhaps simply less refined in his technique, holds a wider, more meandering line. The gap, microscopic to the human eye, begins to open. Not a dramatic lead, but a definitive one. A sigh, half of disappointment, half of satisfied expectation, washes through the room. The natural order is reasserting itself. The palace, it seems, will defeat the vineyard. But then a miracle, or perhaps a tragedy. As Le Glorieux executes his perfect turn, his wide, glorious mucus trail sweeps across the path of L'escargot du Peuple. The vineyard snail's leading tentacles contact the champion's fresh, ultra-slick slime. And instead of being repelled, he does something extraordinary. He hesitates for a second, then subtly alters his course. He isn't following the trail anymore. He is merging with it. His head turns inward, and he begins to slide, almost imperceptibly, onto the champion's own path. He is not trying to pass. He is trying to join. The two mucus trails are about to become one. The crowd sees it. A collective inhale. Is this a tactical merger? A surrender? An act of slimy solidarity? Before anyone can decide, Le Glorieux's front foot touches the silver finishing thread stretched across the time forest. A moment later, dragged along by his own changed trajectory, L'escargot du Peuple's foot touches the same thread, a heartbeat behind. It is over. The host, after a dramatic pause, raises his arm. Le Glorieux, the winner. The declaration is met with a burst of applause, cheers, groans, and the immediate, frantic settling of bets. Coins clink, papers are exchanged. The champion's handler's face floods with relief. He will get a golden Louis for his efforts. The vineyard snail's handler looks down at his feet, his moment of glory vanished in a final, confusing instinct. But the race's end is just the beginning of the ceremony. The winner must be celebrated. A small velvet cushion is brought forward. Le Glorieux, still placidly munching on an invisible bit of something in his path, is carefully lifted and placed upon it. Then, the host produces the prize. It is not a cup. It is not money. It is a miniature crown woven from fine gold wire and studded with tiny seed pearl dewdrops. With great solemnity, the host places this tiny circlet around the snail's shell, where it rests just behind his head. Le Glorieux is now crowned. He wears his crown with the same indifference with which he did everything else. He is a monarch of moist things. The crowd applauds again. The loser, L'escargot du Peuple, is gently picked up and returned to his plain velvet box, his adventure over, his rebellion absorbed into a footnote. The Great Snail Race has reached its official, glittering, and utterly absurd conclusion. The applause dies down, replaced by the cacophony of settled wagers and the clinking of newly filled glasses. Celebration for the winners, consolation for the losers. You'd think the drama was over. But in the corners of the room, in the hushed conversations behind fluttering fans, a different story is beginning to coalesce. The wine grower, his face still flushed from the debate over the grotto, is not celebrating his snail's valiant second place. He is scowling, His eyes narrowed at the champion's handler. He pulls the host aside, his voice a low, insistent rumble you have to strain to hear. "Did you see the trail?" he hisses. "In the final turn? The consistency? It was too perfect. Like gum tragacanth." Gum tragacanth was a common thickening agent used in everything from pastries to wig powder. The accusation is clear. The champion's mucus was adulterated. Doped. The host waves a dismissive hand, but the seed is planted. Meanwhile, near the servant's entrance, you see the defeated handler for Citron, the Duke's snail, in a heated whisper with the boy who tended to the immovable Le Rocher. Their eyes dart toward Le Glorieux's handler, who is proudly accepting backslaps, the gold coin already clutched in his palm. There's a theory brewing that the two boys conspired, that Le Rocher's legendary apathy was not natural, but induced by a pre-race feeding of some soporific lettuce, ensuring one less rival for the favorite. And what of Bourgogne, who went so mysteriously and directly off course to the moss? Was his rose-petal diet perhaps overscented, a distraction in itself? This is the well-known, grimy underbelly of the sport, the scandals. For where there is heavy gambling and aristocratic pride, there is inevitably cheating. Historical records are peppered with accounts of snail racing controversies. Snails weighted down with tiny grains of lead glued inside their shells. Tracks secretly warmed under specific sections to spur on a particular contender. Rival snails being visited the night before a race and sprayed with a fine mist of vinegar, a substance known to make them retreat for hours. But here is a specific, bizarre scandal that few know. The affair of the substituted snail, 1769. A countess, known for her losing streaks, was found to have replaced her own notoriously slow snail with a nearly identical, but famously swift, wild snail from the woods, minutes before a race. The cheat was discovered only because a sharp-eyed marquise noticed the substitute snail had a barely visible hairline crack on its shell that, she claimed, she had observed on the champion during a walk in the gardens the week before. The scandal led to the formal institution of the snail registrar, a ledger where the distinctive shell patterns of racing snails were sketched and documented by a neutral party before major events. One of the earliest forms of biological athlete verification. Back in the salon, the rumors are swirling from a low buzz to a discernible hum. The wine grower's accusation of thickened mucus gains traction when an elderly baron, known as a mucus connoisseur, is persuaded to examine the finish line. He bends stiffly, a magnifying glass in hand, and studies the champion's final trail. He sniffs delicately. He pronounces. The iridescence is consistent, but the ridge height is suspiciously uniform. It lacks the natural, wavering soul of pure snail secretion. This pseudoscientific judgment is enough for the losing faction. Demands are made. The host, wanting to avoid a duel or worse, a social boycott of his next race, agrees to an inspection. Le Glorieux, crown and all, is taken to a side table. Under the scrutiny of multiple pairs of eyes, his shell is examined for hidden weights. None are found. Then comes the most undignified part. A drop of warm water is placed before him to encourage movement, so his fresh mucus can be judged. The champion, perhaps feeling the injustice, perhaps just tired, produces a short, unimpressive trail. It looks normal. The baron hums again, non-committally. The evidence is inconclusive, but the doubt is now a permanent stain on the victory. The glory is tarnished. You notice the champion's handler. The boy's earlier pride has vanished, replaced by a pale, tight-lipped anxiety. His eyes dart toward his master, the owner of Le Glorieux, who is staring into his wine with a stony expression. Whether the cheat was real or not, the whisper of it is a social defeat. The win is now controversial. The perfect, slow narrative of the race has splintered into a dozen messy, human stories of suspicion and resentment. The snails, back in their boxes, are oblivious. But the world they moved through is now murkier, uglier, and far more interesting. The race was a simple tale of speed and distance. The aftermath is a tangled web of pride, deception, and the eternal human need to explain away loss. The salon, once a temple of whimsical anticipation, now feels like a chamber cooling after a fever. The candles have burned lower, pooling wax on their holders. The air, thick with perfume and breath, now also carries the sour note of suspicion and flat champagne. The crowned loup glorieux has been removed from his cushion, his tiny pearl dewdrop crown carefully stored away for the next victor, or perhaps as evidence. The other snails are long since returned to their traveling boxes. The crowd has thinned. The most ardent bettors and scandalmongers remain, clustered in small, murmuring groups. The grand, unifying spectacle has fractured into petty postmortems. You stand near the magnificent racing table, now just a beautiful, empty diorama. The crushed malachite track is scarred with the intersecting, drying trails of the contenders, a chaotic map of the afternoon's hopes. The mirror pond reflects only guttering flames. This, you realize, is the beginning of the end, not just of the evening, but of the entire frivolous, glorious era this pastime represents. The whispers in the room aren't just about mucus doping. They are punctuated by other, heavier words. Turgot's reforms, one man mutters. The American debt, sighs another. A woman complains about the price of bread in Paris, a mundane, grim reality that feels violently out of place among the tiny hedges and toy windmills. This is our well-known historical pivot, the slow, creeping end of the Ancien regime's most decadent diversions. The 1780s loom. The royal treasury is emptying. The ideas of enlightenment are hardening into calls for reform and revolution. The world of limitless leisure and absurdly specialized hobbies is starting to crack under the weight of its own impracticality. Watching snails race while peasants starve is becoming less a charming eccentricity and more a potent symbol of a disconnected, dying class. The Great Snail Races didn't end with a bang, but with a gradual, awkward fading, as if the aristocracy simply forgot to be amused. But here is a poignant, lesser-known detail about that decline. It wasn't just a sudden stop. It was a dilution. As the fashion trickled down from the highest nobility to the aspiring bourgeoisie, it lost its artistry. Middle-class imitators, eager to ape their social betters, would stage races on crude kitchen tables with garden-variety snails, betting buttons and pins instead of gold livres. The elaborate landscapes, the mucus analysts, the codified rules, all were stripped away, leaving only the hollow core of the gamble. The magic was gone. For the true connoisseurs, this vulgarization was the final nail in the coffin. It was no longer exclusive, no longer theirs. When a pastime becomes accessible, it often ceases to be desirable for those who used it as a wall against the common world. In the salon, the host is trying valiantly to salvage the evening. Next season, he announces with forced cheer, I commission a new course, with a moving watermill, and perhaps a hermitage. The response is tepid, a few polite nods. The energy has seeped away. The wine grower has already left in a huff, taking his revolutionary snail with him. The Duke of Orleans is discussing grain prices with a financier, his back turned to the racing table. The beautiful, idle bubble has been pricked by the sharp pins of reality and resentment. You watch as a servant boy approaches the table with a damp cloth. He starts at one end, wiping away the intricate, glistening trails of the race. He erases Loup Glorieux's majestic highway, smears the adventurous detour of l'escargot, du Puple, blurs Citron's geometric precision into a greenish smear. The physical record of the great contest is gone in minutes, reduced to a damp sheen on the crushed stone. The table is reset, made pristine for the next diversion, but feels less like preparation and more like an erasure. The room's focus has scattered, pulled outward to the troubled streets of Paris, to the restless provinces, to a future that has no place for pearl-crowned gastropods. The world outside this cocoon of candlelight is changing, and the change carries a chill that even the thickest brocade cannot keep out. The race is over. The arguments are spent. All that remains is the faint, drying smell of malachite dust and the vague sense that something beautifully silly has just passed, not with a dramatic finale, but with a sigh and a shrug. The age of reason is yielding to an age of upheaval, and there will be no time for snails. You step back from the table, from the dispersing crowd, and let the scene soften at the edges. The voices blur into a murmur. The candle flames elongate into hazy streaks of light. We're leaving that specific salon, that specific night. But the story, like a stubborn sin on a coat, lingers. Where did it all go? The passion, the artistry, the sheer committed absurdity of racing mollusks? It didn't vanish in a thin air. It seeped into the cracks of history, leaving faint, strange stains if you know where to look. Take a walk through a museum of 18th-century decorative arts. There in a glass case, you might see a Sevres porcelain snuff box. Look closely at the miniature painting on its lid. It's not a pastoral scene or a portrait. It's a depiction of a snail, a particularly elegant one, gliding past a tiny painted windmill. A private joke for the Conoscenti. Or examine the marginalia in a first edition of Diderot's Encyclopédie. Next to the serious entry on conchology, the study of shells, an anonymous, witty hand has sketched a tiny cartoon of a snail wearing a laurel wreath, being cheered by other snails. The High Enlightenment, it seems, had a sense of humor about its own obsessions. This diffusion is our popular historical legacy. The snail race as a symbol, a metaphor, a piece of cultural ephemera that pops up in the oddest places. It appears in satirical prints mocking the idleness of the aristocracy. It's referenced in obscure verses by poets comparing their slow, steady pursuit of a muse to a snail's progress. For a brief, shining moment, it was a shared cultural touchstone, a shorthand for a certain kind of privileged, obsessive futility that was also, undeniably, a form of art. But here is the most fascinating, obscure afterlife of the snail race. It quietly influenced early scientific thought, particularly in the budding field of ethology, the study of animal behavior. Gentlemen naturalists who had spent hours noting how light, moisture, and texture affected a snail's path began to apply those same observational principles to other creatures. The meticulous record-keeping of racing committees, noting things like subject became immobile for 23 minutes after sudden shadow, or increased pace by 15% on a dampened clay surface, however unscientific their motive, created a crude database of gastropod responsiveness. A few decades later, more rigorous scientists would look back on these whimsical notes with a mix of amusement and unexpected utility, seeing in them the glimmer of controlled environmental stimulus experiments. Historians of science still occasionally stumble upon a footnote in a 19th-century zoological text that reads something like, "Contrary to the anecdotal reports from the fashionable racing circles of the last century, our experiments show no appreciable preference for clockwise versus counterclockwise orientation." Back in the fading salon, the present is almost gone. But let's follow one last, thin thread. Remember the handler for Luc Glorieux, the boy suspected of cheating? The one who looked so anxious? Rumor has it he left service not long after. Not in disgrace, but with a peculiar new profession. Using the keen eye for detail he honed watching snail trails and shell patterns, he became an inspecteur de tabac, a tobacco inspector, tasked with spotting counterfeit stamps on bundles of imported leaves. He traded the iridescence of mucus for the grain of paper, one form of meticulous observation for another. His story, likely apocryphal, is a perfect metaphor. The skills of a dying whimsy were repurposed for the mundane bureaucracy of the emerging modern world. The poetry of the race was translated into the prose of commerce. The legacy is a ghost. It's in the way we still use the phrase at a snail's pace, perhaps forgetting it once described a literal bet upon velocity. It's in the modern, quirky festivals that occasionally pop up where people race garden snails for laughs, completely unaware of the layers of history, art, and scandal they are inadvertently echoing. They think they are being silly and original. They have no idea they are pantomiming the final, faded echo of a grand, ridiculous, and deeply human obsession. The world moved on, as it always does, from the particular to the general, from the ornate to the plain. But for a moment, in certain candlelit rooms, the progress of a creature that carries its home on its back was the most important thing in the universe. And that, in itself, is a kind of mad, beautiful heritage. The last image of the salon dissolves like sugar in water. The powdered wigs, the anxious handlers, the magnificent table, all fade into a soft, dark blur. You're back in your own space now, wherever that may be. The fan hums its steady, artificial breeze. The screen before you is dark, or perhaps casts the faintest blue glow. And the silence that follows the story is different. It's no longer the anticipatory hush of the race, but the quiet of a page being turned, of a book closed gently. We've returned from that world of exquisite slowness, and the contrast is jarring. Think about your own pace for a moment. The frantic scroll of a timeline, the ping of a notification, the relentless chase for the next task, the next dopamine hit, the next piece of content consumed and discarded. Your heartbeat, even at rest, would have been a frantic drum solo to the people in that salon. Your ability to process information, to multitask, would have seemed like witchcraft. You are a creature of speed, of efficiency, of optimized time. And they were architects of lingered moments, masters of stretched anticipation. They found suspense in a millimeter. You can barely tolerate a 3-second buffer on a video. The comparison isn't about which is better. It's about the sheer, breathtaking foreignness of the other. This is the modern reflection, the obvious takeaway. Our worlds are diametrically opposed. Their boredom is our panic. Their patient investment in a single, slow event is anathema to our fractured attention. We have conquered time by slicing it into infinitely usable, tradable fragments. They surrendered to it, allowing it to pool around them like honey, and built intricate games in the thick of it. You, with your to-do lists and calendar alerts, would have been diagnosed with a dangerous frenzy of the spirits. They, with their snail races, would be diagnosed with clinical depression by our standards. The gulf feels unbridgeable. But here's the strange, quieter truth that lingers beneath that contrast. They weren't just being slow. They were practicing a kind of deep, collective focus we've almost forgotten. For those hours, every person in that room was paying attention to the same tiny, simple thing. Their minds, as sharp and cunning as any, were all channeled toward predicting the unpredictable path of a simple creature. There were no side conversations texting under the table. No one was checking the stock prices of the East India Company on a pocket device. It was a shared, singular immersion. In our world of infinite choice and parallel realities, that kind of unified, communal attention is as extinct as the dodo. We have gained the world and lost the ability to all look at the same snail. Historians and sociologists still debate what we lost in that trade. Was a loss of depth, of shared narrative? Or was it simply the shedding of a beautiful, pointless skin, allowing for progress, for medicine, for the very device you're using to hear this? There's no clean answer. But sitting here in the quiet dark, you can feel the ghost of that lost focus. It's the feeling of a mind not tugged in 10 directions, but flowing in one, like the relentless, single-minded glide of Luke Glorieux down the final straightaway. It's a peaceful feeling, but also a lonely one in our connected age. We are never bored, but are we ever that profoundly, collectively present? So let the silence settle. Let the ghost of the snail race sit with you for a moment. Not as a wish to go back. You'd miss modern dentistry and the internet far too much, but as a reminder of a different rhythm. A rhythm where time was not an enemy to be beaten, but a medium to be shaped, even if the sculpture was made of mucus and whimsy. The world they built was unsustainable, unequal, and headed for a bloody reckoning. But within its flawed heart, it held a secret: how to make an entire room hold its breath for an hour, waiting for a creature with a brain the size of a poppy seed to make a decision. That's a kind of magic no algorithm can replicate. And as the night deepens, that magic feels very, very far away. The final echoes of comparison fade. The last flicker of the imagined candle is gone, swallowed by the comfortable, familiar dark of your own room. The hum of the fan is no longer the background to a story. It's just itself, a soft, mechanical lullaby. The tension in your shoulders you didn't realize you were carrying, the residual tightness from leaning into that long-ago drama, begins to soften and melt away. There are no more bets to place, no scandals to uncover, no pearls to crown a champion with. The race is run. The story is told. Let your eyes close if they haven't already. Feel the weight of your body settling into the mattress, the chair, the space you occupy. Picture the racing table one last time, not in the sharp focus of drama, but as a distant, blurry painting. See the green track as just a smear of color, the windmill a soft toothpick shape, the mirror pond a tiny smudge of light. Let it all soften, blur, and recede into a pleasant, meaningless pattern, like wallpaper seen through half-closed lids. The snails are safe in their anachronistic boxes. The aristocrats are dust and whispers. The ledger of bets is ash. None of it needs your attention anymore. Your breath is your own rhythm now. In and out, slow like the tide. Not the forced slowness of waiting, but the natural, easy slowness of surrender. There is nowhere you need to be that isn't right here. Nothing you need to follow but the gentle rise and fall of your own chest. The frantic pace of your day, the digital pulse of your modern life. It's all outside this quiet circle you've drawn with this story. For now, it can wait. It will all still be there, buzzing and demanding in the morning. But morning is a long, gentle slope of darkness away. The Great Snail Race has ended, not with a verdict or a moral, but with a release. It was a vessel, a beautiful, ornate, slightly ridiculous vessel, to carry you away from the sharp edges of now and into the soft, forgiving past. And its final gift is this: the permission to be still. To be as still as Lou Rocher on his pedestal, as unconcerned with progress as Bourgogne eating moss. Your thoughts can meander now, without purpose, like l'escargot, dew puple taking a scenic route over a grotto. There is no finish line to cross, no prize to win, except this quiet, this deep, velvety quiet. So let the darkness behind your eyelids be deep and complete. Let the sound of my voice be nothing more than a faint, familiar texture in the quiet, a trail to follow and to sleep. The story is done. The spectators have gone home. The table is clean. All that's left is the gentle, patient, all-encompassing silence, holding you as surely as the earth holds a sleeping seed. There is nothing more to listen for, nothing more to understand, just this breath, and the next, slower now, and the next, and a script. Sweet dreams.